we'll go ahead and start right off the top. I want to welcome Michael Catlow to the show today. For those of you who have not had the privilege of meeting Michael, I want to ask Michael if you would. I know your background because we've known each other for a little over a year, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Trying
probably.
to pull out the calendar just through networking. But tell our audience, if you would, a little bit about yourself. First of all, kind of where you grew up, what you do now for a business, and then if you could connect the dots for us a little on how you got to where you are with what you're doing today from where you started.
Yeah, sure. Well, John, it's an honor to be here with you. And as John was sending me the introduction form for today's recording, he asked if there was any specific way that I wanted to be introduced. And I put, seriously, one of John Sanchez's biggest fans. So that's how I'll start today, with saying I am a fan of yours, John, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. And actually, the way we're recording this right now on audio and on video is partially responsible because of your influence and your input on one of those Ask the Expert speaking engagements where I was an attendee and you were speaking, where you were talking about standing up and being fully engaged. And so I am doing this recording while standing up. So thank you for your influence in my life.
So for full disclosure, I'm sitting down. And I'll tell you why. It's intentional, because I've always tried to look at this podcast like I want to keep it casual and conversational. And so I think that there's almost an association in my brain when I'm standing up, especially when I'm doing Zoom. I feel like I go into like presenter or trainer mode.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So I've kind of purposely sat myself down. But I even have a note on my screen. I'll bet you have something similar, but I don't know if you do or not. I taped a little piece of paper on my screen that just says, be yourself, not a presenter.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Right. So where did you grow up, Michael? Where in the world?
So back to the original question. I just wanted to make sure I started out that way. So I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. So I kind of grew up my first few years in Maryland. But by the time I was in third grade, I had moved 9 separate times. My family was not involved in the military, but my dad did somewhat support military establishments as an engineer. So we moved around a whole bunch while I was younger. And I believe that had some type of influence in my personality and who I am, and this desire to always kind of be on the go and moving. So in that time frame, ended up back in Maryland, and then graduated from high school in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and decided I wanted to play baseball. So I came down to visit Charlotte, North Carolina in February. The weather was spectacular. I thought, oh my gosh, I could play baseball year round here. Applied at UNC Charlotte. Haven't touched a baseball bat since, in about 30 years. But that was the goal, to come down here, and then lived in Charlotte for 20 some odd years. And then 2013, through a whole series and a whole story, sold my house, sold my car, packed up everything I had into basically a carry-on bag and a backpack. And in 2013, August 2013, booked a one-way plane ticket to Mexico and thought, it's a big, beautiful world out there. I want to go see it. And fast forward almost 10 years later now, I've been traveling the world as a bit of a digital nomad.
So for those that are not familiar with the whole digital nomad lifestyle, tell us your definition of a digital nomad.
That is a great question. So location independent, do not own a house, don't have a contract on a lease or a rental, have lived in different parts of the world. And the vast majority of our income is not geographically based. So we use online services, mobile apps, social media, things like that to earn an income while traveling around the world.
So you just hit on one of the things that is one of the reasons I invited you on the show, which is one of my goals in life is to do exactly what you're talking about, where my business now is predominantly me trading time for money, being in a situation where I am live with people, delivering training to them, whether that's via Zoom or face-to-face, but I have to be there at the same time as them.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And so that's one of the things when we first met that really fascinated me about you and your business and how you work that. You are, by the way, the reason that I now have the hard copy of this 4-Hour Work Week. I had the Kindle version, and you mentioned that book so many times in different meetings that we cross paths in, that I thought, you know what, there's a handful of books that I have both on Kindle and the physical copy,
Yep.
because I much prefer the physical book to refer to and make notes on.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have to have the Kindle to take it on the go because I travel.
Yeah. 100%.
How much was that book? Was that the first germ of the idea for Digital Nomad, or was that just kind of a little extra boost of ideas?
Yeah, I'm going to answer with the best that I can remember. So I don't know if that book really, really resonated with me because I had the desire, the heart, the kind of moral compass, so to speak, to do that, or if that was a triggering point for it. But so which came first, right? The chicken or the egg? But there were definitely lessons learned in there, philosophies learned in there, action steps, ways of looking at the world that 100% gave me, I'll say, permission or just encouraged me to take that very, very, very scary, unknown, fearful, like what if, what could happen step. That was a huge, huge piece of it. Whether it was step 1 or step 3 in the process, I'm not really sure.
So you mentioned that when you were talking, kind of helping us define the whole digital nomad thing, you mentioned you're location independent. You don't have to be in a specific geographic location to earn income. What is it that I know you a little bit kind of have your hands in different things, but if you had to say the main thing that that you generate your income from, what is the main thing right now?
Yeah, so it's in the travel space for sure. Leisure travel, vacation travel, and there's several different aspects which we can touch on. Not so much business travel or just like booking a flight, but creating amazing memories while on holiday, while on vacation, creating memories with your family and friends around the world. And then also on the flip side of that, teaching people, whether they're like incredibly spare time. And I'll share how and why that came about 10 years ago and why it was so important. But everything is in the travel space, and then a bit of coaching / inspiring / mentoring others to do the same, which doesn't necessarily have to be their income from the travel space. Their income could come from coaching or speaking or any other type of service, but the mentality it takes to be location independent or income independent as well. We do some coaching around that.
So just for clarity for the viewers, because I think sometimes we fall into the curse of knowledge, right? Like, you know your business so well that I think the way you described it, some people might be wondering, so do you have a travel agency? So you and Katie have an actual travel agency, but there's a little more to it than that, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. So right now, like, this is being recorded on February 20th, 2023, right? So depending on when you're watching this, and in today's world, we know that the internet has changed so many different industries. So in the past, really the only way to like make money in travel was if you had like a brick and mortar travel agency at the strip center, in the shopping mall, things like that. Then the internet came about with your Expedias and your booking.coms, and a bunch of people just went to those services. But unbeknownst to many people, travel agencies are still a way big part of the travel industry, and sometimes really important. So we do own an independent travel agency. 100% of everything is done online. And one of the things that people may not realize is everything we do for clients and customers is completely free within our travel agency. So we, most of the time, I'll say a strong 95% of the time, especially if we're talking a cruise and all-inclusive, like some type of tour or vacation package, we get the customer a better deal than they can get on an Expedia, a booking.com, and even no matter how great of a price shopper they are, because of the volume that we do as a travel agency or as a travel provider, we get insider rates that we can offer to the customers in many cases. So they get a better deal, and we charge no fees to them because we are compensated on the back end by the vendor. So it's a win-win-win. Vendor gets new clients and customers, the customer gets a better deal and somebody to take some of the headache and the hassle off of their shoulders of having to do a lot of stuff. And then we get compensated as the middleman.
So one of the things when we were talking, I think it was at a holiday party that we were talking about, you were just telling me a little bit about some of the travels that you had done most recently. And one of the things that caught my attention was you were talking about things that sounded off the beaten path,
Yeah.
which really resonated with me because in the traveling that I've done, I found that the things that we've kind of stumbled across
Yeah.
that weren't necessarily in all the tourism books or advertisements were the ones that ended up being the coolest ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how do you find those off the beaten track things that then I would guess are big sales points for people that might be interested in going to one of those places that you've been to?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll use the most recent big trip that we did. So in September 2022, did I say February 20th, 2023? I hope I said
I
that
think you
correctly
said 23.
earlier. So in September, October 2022, Katie and I did a 60+ day trip, starting in where did we start? In Dominican Republic, and then went over to Europe and spent most of the time in Europe, then to Iceland, and then to Hawaii, and then back to the Carolinas. So I'll explain it this way. One of the destinations that we went to was Portugal. Neither of us had ever been to Portugal. We didn't really know much about Portugal. We had done a cruise as part of the time frame from Rome across the Mediterranean and ending in Lisbon, Portugal. So what I first did was just went to Google and looked at what are the top things to do in Lisbon, right? Because we were only going to maybe stay there for a day, see some of the main highlights, and then fly back home. But as I honestly just started Googling around things to do in Lisbon, of course, there's other little sponsored ads and things that come up. So then I started searching off the beaten path Portugal destinations. Now, one of the other things about Portugal in particular was there was one region that, because we are location independent, digital nomads, I look at the best places for expats to retire, even though we're in our 40s. So we're however one defines retirement. And there was this area in southern Portugal, which is called the Algarve. I think I pronounced that correctly. Beautiful pictures. And it's rated as one of the best places to retire in Europe. You still get the European lifestyle, but it's cheaper than some of the other places. So all the public information says. So we landed in Lisbon with the cruise, rented a car, decided to drive down to the Algarve. But here's where it got interesting. What I then searched was most Instagrammable spots in Portugal. And so we came across this place called Monsanto. I think that's how it's pronounced. And it was rated or voted the most Portuguese village in all of Portugal. Now, I have no idea what that means, right? The most Portuguese village.
It sounds cool though.
So I looked at a few pictures on Instagram, and they were saying this is where you need to go take your picture. And so it was about an 8-hour drive north of where we were, but we literally got in the car and just drove there. And it was out of the 9 days or whatever we were in Portugal, it was the coolest experience. This village up on a hill built into the boulders that are there. So half the walls in the place are a solid rock, but you're not in a cave. It's this third-party thing. So honestly, I just searched blog posts, other travel writers. But the thing that we find probably the easiest to do is most Instagrammable spots in Rome, Italy, or most Instagrammable spots in Miami. And of course, let's use Rome as an example. Somebody's going to say the Colosseum, right? This is where you stand, the angle you want to get. But on your way from the Colosseum to the Trevi Fountain or to the Spanish Steps, make sure to stop at this little restaurant. And so and we don't have any bloggers that we always follow, we're not subscribed to a bunch of newsletters. So it's literally on the fly in many cases. And it's just oh, that sounds cool. That seems like a neat experience. Looks like a cool picture. Does it resonate with what we want to do? And let's go do it.
So I never would have thought to search on that term, most Instagrammable spots in fill in blank, wherever it is that you're going. That's a great sort of cheat code or hack.
I tell you, John, right? We were talking about the wall behind me and how it might be a distracting background, but we've got these pictures from all over the world. And this one right here, which is kind of far away, but it's us jumping over the pyramids of Giza. And that was 100% from an Instagram post that we saw, which said, you know, with depth of perception, you got to get far enough away. Here's where you go. Here's how you walk out there. Set your camera on a tripod and just jump up, and it'll look like you're jumping over the pyramids. And that was 100%. It's one of my favorite pictures. It's on like a lot of our profiles and stuff, but that's one that came from a Instagrammable thing to do at the pyramids.
So all of those pictures and what you were just talking about, I don't know why my brain connects dots in strange ways. Probably my easy distractibility, but while you were talking about that, for some reason I thought, if I had to guess, I would, whether you were more introverted versus extroverted, my guess would be that you're more on the extrovert end of things. Do you identify that way?
Yeah, yes. Katie is the complete opposite.
Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
So you recently made a comment about one of my Facebook posts. It was actually not my Facebook post. It was Melissa, my girlfriend's Facebook post.
Yeah.
And you had commented on that post. And I think this is why I thought of it, because she is much more on the extreme end of extroverts. I'm a little bit towards the middle, but definitely lean more towards introverts.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, that old thing about, you know, opposites attracting, and you mentioned Katie's more of an introvert. How do you see that playing out in your day-to-day relationship as a couple, especially given what you do? Not just the fact that you travel a lot, but you guys network a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
So I'll say peaks and valleys, right? Excitement and frustration, right? Opposites attract and opposites repel at the same time.
Yeah.
So there is no exact answer. And it's funny you ask that, because right before getting on here, we're working on like a bit of a tagline because of some of the experiences that we've had here recently. And here's what we've kind of come up with as of today, right? Two opposites navigating, hence travel, life, love, and other impactful questions. And so like for a blog, for a podcast, for a vlog, and so forth. And because some things we do are great. Like I come up with all these crazy ideas, and Katie is probably the most agreeable person I've ever met in my life, even being an introvert. Like she's just like, yep, sounds good. Let's go do it. And at the same time, some of our opposites, introvert, extrovert, and so many others, the way we were raised, our backgrounds and so forth, it has created, for me, probably not for her, some of the biggest challenges that I've had in my life as well, because I look at life through this little box, and her box is very, very different. So the assumptions, the prejudgments that she's going to think about something the same way or see something the same way has been exciting and created a lot of challenges.
So as you're answering it, I think I know why I connected the dots on that, because Melissa is huge on travel. It's one of her favorite things.
Yeah.
I love to travel too, but here's how we're very different. When I travel, I like to sleep in, wake up, maybe have one thing on the agenda, and then just kind of chill and just see what unfolds.
Yeah.
In everyday life, Melissa is much more, let's just kind of see what happens and let's kind of go with the flow. But on vacation, like Disney's a great example. She's huge on Disney. It's almost military. Like she is up at the crack of dawn and she has her agenda all laid out. And so where we have to find that balance when we travel is I'm that guy that I'll see the tour guide come through with a bunch of people, and they're giving the explanation about, here's this piece of art that you're looking at, and here's the artist and some history and blah, blah, blah. They give that little piece of history, and then the whole group moves on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm the guy standing there going, dude, you guys are missing, like, there's so much more to see here.
Yeah.
You're missing all this. And so I found that when we travel, that's something we're still kind of on a case-by-case basis as we're traveling, constantly working through how we kind of come to that happy medium.
Yeah. Yeah.
And balancing that, because we kind of enjoy how we take things in very differently.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe was when my brain kind of was connecting the dots. So since we're kind of talking a little bit about the opposites and introverts and extroverts, it makes me think about one of the areas that I think is one of the biggest areas of communication that I'm constantly working on is listening. Have you found that with your different personalities, especially as the introvert and extrovert thing applies, that there are certain specific ways that you have to try to listen differently than might be your normal default, especially when dealing with Katie or any introvert?
Yeah. I think I'll use a different metaphor or a different explanation instead of introvert and extrovert on this topic. Some people may be familiar with these terms as it relates to this, but if we use the masculine energy versus the feminine energy. And so we've also studied a lot of this, at least in some capacity. And so like as a general rule, like the masculine or a hunter type thing is like laser focused. You don't see anything else, blinders on, like go, whether it's goal oriented, task oriented, accomplish things. And masculine, feminine does not have to be man or woman and so forth. It's just kind of that energy space. Whereas feminine or more of a gatherer, maybe like, oh, look at all these wonderful things that are going on. And there's beautiful this and beautiful that and beautiful this and beautiful that. And so Katie and I, as a general rule, most people think masculine is for a man, feminine is for a female. And in our case, we're like flipped most of the time. I'm like wanting to dance around and like celebrate and like at the gym, as an example, like be listening to music and dancing in between sets. And Katie is very laser focused, very task oriented, very like matter of fact. And I'll touch on it on communication. So like with me, I might go, so if we're looking at a travel destination as an example, oh, well, like in Greece, there's Meteora, there's there's this, which one do you want to do? And she about freaks out. It's like, give me not even two options. Do you want to go? Yes or no? Like, that's it. And then that's how she maximizes like her way of operation and her way of life. So sometimes I can't even imagine the frustrations I cause for her because I'm like, oh, look at this, but what about this? Oh, but what if we did this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And meanwhile, she's just like, can we just go? Right? Like,
Yeah.
So that I think in communication, whether it's in business or whatever, sometimes like I'll try to ask people. So John, if you want me to explain something, do you prefer like big broad strokes or would you like lots of nuts and bolts and details? And so asking somebody who I don't know their personality style that question allows me to know kind of how they receive information best as opposed to just me being me. So there's little things you can tweak along that way. And sometimes it's easier in maybe a business setting or a work setting because you're consciously aware of it. In our marriage, in our relationship, sometimes it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I forget. And then I create lots of turmoil in our relationship.
Yeah. So you just touched on the awareness piece of communication, which I think is a huge piece of it. And I always find it interesting that we often fall into that phrase of the cobbler's children having no shoes, right? It's like I teach communication skills to accountants for the most part for a living.
Yeah.
And then I find in my personal life, I'll make the dumbest mistakes of something that you just touched on, thinking that because this is how I like it, or I prefer to give or receive information, communication, details, things like that, even though I do this for a living and I'm very aware when I'm at work about asking those questions and trying to pay attention, I slip into my default of lots of information, which sometimes can create information overload. My specific way, I'm much more kinesthetic and a little bit more visual. So the awareness piece, it's interesting that you mentioned that you'll actually ask those specific questions to be able, instead of assuming or jumping to conclusions quickly, to actually ask some specific questions to be able to be more aware, and then be able to be adaptable.
Especially in a business setting like I was using, that's what first pops in my mind. If I'm presenting our products, goods and services or opportunity or whatever to a potential client or customer, I want to make sure I communicate in the right ways. So asking some of those types of questions makes it easier to speak the same language.
So what are some of the ones that are sort of go-to questions for you to help get at that?
Well, some of it as well is you can, if you are using your term aware, right, just with the awareness. And if you're familiar with, is somebody and not that every tactic that somebody does is going to be applicable to an introvert, or every way of being is going to be an extrovert. There's patterns in there, right? So honestly, the question may not matter. It, like, say you were calling me and we were talking about a vacation, right? I might just say, hey, John, so what vacations have you done before in the past that you really liked, or what were some of your experiences? So if you are more, whether this is on the phone or Zoom or in person at a coffee shop, whatever, if you're more kinesthetic and this, I can communicate back with rapport, right? Just kind of communicating with rapport, versus if a little more reserved and using matter of fact type language. So it's not even necessarily the question. It is if you're able to watch somebody's mannerism and mirror and match how they are. And then there's also the fine line with that, because you also might be able to inspire somebody by being different than they are, as well as just trying to communicate. But that feeling that people get of man, this person really gets me, without having to say words or answer things, just by that mirror and matching, I think is powerful. And again, if we're conscious and aware of it in a business or career type setting, how often do I forget that on a daily basis in my own personal relationship? So this call right here has been a great marriage coaching call for me to remind me how to be in life.
Well, so I think a part of that is, I heard someone once ask someone else, how hard is it to remember fill in the blank, right? How is it really that hard to remember that your wife prefers short amounts of information, right? They don't want the information overload. And I don't remember where I heard it, but the answer the guy gave, I found fascinating, which is, it's actually not that hard to remember. Problem is, it's easier to forget, right? And it sounds almost like a silly thing to say, but I think there's some truth to that. And it's why some of us fall back into those patterns, even though we might recognize, if we had the awareness, okay, I need to stop for a second and kind of put my thinking cap on before I start talking.
Yeah.
We're so comfortable in those personal relationships, right? And it's almost like the closer the personal relationship is, we sort of let down our guard. We think, well, we don't have to be on, right? I'm not at work. And so I can just relax. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we fall into those bad habits. You said something that about, and I can't remember if you actually used the term, but empathy, which is, there's a great book. I actually have it here, because I was going to ask you if you have do you have this book, Never Split the Difference?
No.
Chris Voss. I'll mention, I'll send you a link to it later. So Chris Voss is the guy that wrote that book. He is a former FBI hostage negotiator. And he talks about not just empathy, but he uses a term that he calls tactical empathy. And he differentiates tactical empathy from emotional empathy, in that what he's looking for, and this is what you touched on, is feeding back what that person said in a way that makes them feel like, this guy gets me. He understands. And he talks about what you're looking for is some version of them verbalizing, that's right. Not you're right, that's right. Meaning, what you just said makes me know you get me. And then you get into that rapport with people. And the important distinction there, especially when we're talking about business, is it does not imply in any way, shape, or form agreement. Right. And he's real clear about that, because he was a hostage negotiator, right? So he was literally talking to people who were evil people that wanted to do physical harm to other people. He was not looking for common ground with them of things we have in common in order to build rapport. What he was looking for was, I need to ask enough questions that I can feed it back to them, so they know that they know that they know that I understand where they're coming from. And that's where we start to then kind of build that bridge of that empathy to say, okay, we're at least on the same page. Now we can start working towards that common goal, which in his case might be, I got to get this hostage out safe. In a business setting, obviously the stakes are not as high, but we still always have some kind of goal that we have to find that common ground to be able to work towards that.
Totally.
So I've got a question. Go ahead.
Well, just while you were sharing that, it reminded me of something I haven't done in a while, just because I haven't had the circumstance to do it in a while. But one of the most powerful like communication moments that I've had, and I'll use business because it was in a business scenario, but again, as solopreneurs, small business owners, you know, with a few people maybe on a team here and there, I still think business is way more than just business because it's usually birthed out of who you are, right? And it's a passion project of some sorts. But remembering that there were different personalities in the room, a mentor of mine, he said, look, when you're going to have communication or conversations or like brainstorming sessions with your team, here's what you need. Here's a suggestion for you. All right, we're going to get everybody different color hats, a green hat, a red hat, and a yellow hat. And you're going to go, okay, everybody put on your green hat. And at this point, no matter what pops up in your mind, the only thing that you are able to talk about is what's possible in our business, the good things moving forward. And we are going to transition. We're all going to put on our red hats, and it's going to be, what are things we need to fix? What are problems that we have? But while we are in this brainstorming or clarity seeking session, we need to make sure we keep the energy flowing, and we pour gasoline on the fire of excitement and going, and then pour gasoline on the fire of correcting the problems. And so just having that context, right? And again, I haven't done this like in interpersonal relationships really, but like, hey, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to make sure I think it was Socrates who said, before having a conversation, you need to define all the terms. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is how we're going to talk about it, and getting on that same page and how important that is.
So I'm curious that the question that I have is basically like the nature and nurture question, but let me give you some context for what brought it up and why I want to ask about it. I have noticed in all our interactions that some of the things that you do are things that I would look at it and go, that's a good behavior to model as it relates to communication, right? So some specific observations, right? You make good eye contact. You're very good about using your physical gestures in a way that it's not over the top, but you use them appropriately to sort of illustrate things, right? In the body language world, they specifically call it actually illustrators, when you're using your body language to help illustrate a concept, right? You did it just earlier when you were kind of doing this and you were talking about back and forth, or when you do a timeline and you're kind of going from left to right. So the question that I have for you, I know you're big into personal development, but when it comes specifically to the way you communicate, do you feel like a lot of these things that I've described that you do just come naturally, or are they things that you kind of had to learn by studying them?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I've never really thought through that. So this is going to be kind of off the cuff, so don't hold it as fact. But the first thing that popped up in my head is years ago, and yes, I've read a bunch of books, listened to a bunch of audios. I've had a lot of personal experiences in a good way. I've screwed a whole bunch of stuff up in a really bad way as well, which sometimes are the best learning lessons. But I think from a communication standpoint, one of, if not the most powerful thing that somebody ever shared with me was they said our brain does not communicate in written words, right? So, and they used the example, they said, think of a dog, and your brain doesn't go D-O-G unless you say, think of the letters D-O-G, right? So if I say, think of a dog, a person pictures a dog they know, a dog they like, a dog they don't like, just it pictures this dog. So in communication, it was like you have to be able to, if you want to communicate, you have to communicate in pictures, not in words. And so I never really put like 2 and 2 together, as I did that on purpose there, of let me make sure gestures do that. But maybe a part of it as well, John, is I have personally, I think I'm at 59 countries now, personally traveled. So many of those places, like I haven't spoken the language. Now, Google Translate has made it way easy nowadays. So like gestures are, universal, eat and drink and tired. Right. So maybe that's been a piece of it as well, is just making sure to communicate with people from all over the world, all different languages and so forth. That's a great question, though. Never thought about it.
I think the reason that I thought about it too is because you've heard me tell this story before about how I got into doing what I do, right? So I train predominantly accountants to help them improve their communication skills. And I tell the story often that I got into self-improvement and focusing on improving my own communication, literally because somebody just told me point blank, like, you're terrible at this, right? And then they gave me some specific examples of things that I had done. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I hate people like that. I'm that guy, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized that so many things are context dependent, right? So I always felt like I was a people person and I could get along with anybody, like literally anybody, from a blue collar worker to the CEO, the CFO, from one culture to another. It didn't matter. I always felt like I could get along with everyone. But what I didn't realize is in certain circumstances, my awareness just shut off and I got tunnel vision. And what happened in that work situation was these people only knew me at work. And what they pointed out was that there were several times where I was walking down the hall and I passed them in the hall. They said hello and I completely ignored them.
Yeah.
And it was because, and I didn't know this at the time, I was so focused on whatever it was, like a report I had in my hand or something I was doing, I didn't even register. My awareness was like completely shut off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, that was the biggest thing that I had to work on, because what I realized as I started reading books and taking courses is I actually did a lot of the things right when I was thinking about it. But I had to be in certain situations for it to come naturally. And when I was in other situations, and it's still true today, I have to kind of put on that, you use that metaphor of different colored hat.
Yeah.
I actually have a stack of different colored hats that I use in some presentations.
Okay.
I talk about putting on, if I'm going to talk to salespeople, as someone who came from an accounting background, I need to put on my sales hat.
Yeah.
Because they don't think the same way that most accountants do. They don't think in lots of detail. They think much more in terms like you talked about, visually, metaphors, because they're trying to get someone to emotionally engage with something that they're trying to sell. And they're not focused on tons of details. They're focused on the emotional part of it.
Yeah.
And the metaphors and the stories and the things like that are a much quicker shortcut to getting to that.
Yeah.
So I always find that interesting, the nature nurture piece in a lot of different ways. But
Well, and as you share, that what also comes up for me is the old sales adage: facts tell, stories sell, right? And whether it's in business, or one of the examples that I was always used with me as well is like a kid trying to like get a cookie from mom and dad is also selling, and a parent trying to get the kid to take a bath is also selling. So it doesn't have to be in in a business context, but facts tell, stories sell. But I think there's a caveat to it, only if you're a good storyteller in that particular aspect. So I don't know, it's an interesting, that's a very deep topic. I think that could go a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I love doing a podcast, is I get to talk about some of these things with people who all have a different background and different experiences that they bring to the conversation. And whatever, I don't know what it was that triggered this, but as you were talking, it made me think about mindset, right? And I think you and I have had conversations about mindset. And I was listening to something recently. It's a podcast called Diary of a CEO. It's a guy named Stephen Bartlett. And the specific episode, he had Simon Sinek on, right? The guy who wrote Start
100%.
With Why, right? And the question they were talking about, at first I thought it sounded woo-woo until I actually kind of paid more attention. And the question was, is mindset a privilege? And Simon Sinek answered it in the context of people come from all different backgrounds, right? And so someone might make an argument that someone who comes from a background where they didn't have anyone in their life who had a growth mindset, but maybe they were surrounded by people who had more of like a victim mindset, that, hey, we come from this part of town. Nobody in our family's ever graduated from high school. We never catch a break. That they're constantly surrounded by that mindset that almost is like a mind virus, right? And so there's an argument that he said some people make, that it's a privilege to come from a background that instills a growth mindset in you, because you grow up with that mindset that, hey, anything is possible if I'm willing to do the work. So the question I would throw at you is, how do you look at mindset as, is it a privilege, or is it something that doesn't matter where you come from? It's out there for the taking if you just choose to go after that growth mindset.
Yeah. So as you were sharing, and I think maybe, again, we have to define the terms, right? But privilege. So maybe privilege is until a certain age, but once somebody reaches a certain age, then it is like you are consciously aware of the choices that you have the ability to make, whether you see an NBA player, right? Or you see a business person, or you see a fit person, or whatever. You see it and you know that something is possible, whether you've been indoctrinated to do it or not. But here's what came up for me. See, nobody in my family or close circle, like growing up, was ever an entrepreneur. Like nobody owned a business. Everybody worked corporate 9 to 5. Like some had good jobs, some had not so good jobs, some had money, some were struggling, you know, on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. But there was one thing that happened was one of my sisters, she started dating a gentleman who did own a business, and he owned some vending machines, right? Like not this world's largest, biggest business. And I don't know, I was 11 or 12 years old or something. And we were just riding in the car. And again, memories are somewhat fuzzy, but this is how I remember it, because I still pretty clearly, it's been an impact on me. So I was 11 or 12, and he had this huge bag of gumballs, because he had vending machines, and we went somewhere and he had me go put the gumballs into the gumball machine because he was getting the cash from the other person or whatever. And then we went to go pay for fuel, gas, a little bit later. And he gave me a bag of quarters to go pay for gas instead of a credit card or dollars or whatever. This would have been 30 years ago. And I remember that moment going, this guy has this huge bag of quarters, like it was this big bag of loot, right? It's almost like the emoji, the dollar with the dollar sign.
Yeah.
This huge bag of money that came from putting something I love, gumballs, in this little machine. And it was enough to pay for gas, even though I didn't have a license, I don't have a car. And it was this triggering moment in my life that was like, I don't remember the exact thoughts, but man, like there's something different here. And so since I've been, I don't know, and then now I've been basically entrepreneurial my entire adult life, even before I graduated high school. But I'm the only person in my family that operates that way. So was it because of privilege, or was it just because there was a triggering moment that happened for me? And I didn't come from any money. I didn't come from anything like that. So I don't know.
Yeah. So
when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, whatever that is, I think.
Oh my gosh, you're bringing up something. The first time I heard that, I think was in response to me asking a question of a guy. So I think we talked about this before. Back in, I think it was 99, I got involved with Primerica, right? A financial services company. It's a multi-level marketing financial services company, right? And so in that business model, you typically work with mentors who have a financial interest in you. And I remember the guy who was running the office that I worked out of, at the trainings that they would do, every week I started to feel like, God, he just talks about the same stuff over and over again. Why isn't he talking about anything new? And so one day I walked up to him after one of the trainings and I was like, Kerry, you've done the same training, like, I don't know how many times in a row. Like, when are we going to learn something new? And he said that phrase to me. He said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I'm giving you the same sermon because you haven't done anything with it yet. Right. You're not ready for something new, clearly, because you haven't done anything with what I've taught you so far. And at first it aggravated me because it felt like a dodge to me. It felt, and I had to have enough personal experience of that sinking in, of going, oh, now I get some personal experience where I went, oh, that thing that he kept repeating, this is the time that I need to remember that and use what he taught me. And then I went back to the office and I was like, dude, I get it now. But it wasn't until something happened that was real for me that phrase made any sense. You use two words that I want to touch on more. You mentioned mentors and you mentioned one of your sisters. How many siblings do you have?
So it's funny, we just had this conversation on Saturday at my mom's Mardi Gras party. So technically, I have 5 sisters.
Oh,
However,
wow.
3 are half sisters, 2 are stepsisters. So I have none that are full blood related, 3 half, 2 step.
Okay. But all sisters.
All sisters and all older by a minimum of 5 years.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So that's an interesting dynamic. So my brother's about almost exactly 4.5 years older than me. And part of the reason that I wanted to ask you about this is you use mentors and siblings. So I'm curious, especially in your case, because your sisters are old, so much older than you, 5 years you said minimum. Have any of them served as mentors at different times in your life?
So one of them served as what not to do.
Okay.
To be very clear, which sometimes that's the most powerful lesson you can have as well, or the most powerful mentor, is what not to do. And the others, I would not classify them that way. Now, at the same time, can we learn something from all 8 billion people on planet Earth? Yes. Do all these little, like every little interaction has an impact on us and leaves us a bit of a different person? Yes. But I wouldn't say for many of my sisters or family really that there's been like the triggering, life altering, wow, aha type experiences or moments, at least that I can recall.
Okay. So what about mentors?
Yeah. So some have been in like personal relationships and some have been authors and speakers that I've never even met before that I would still consider a mentor.
So have you actually gone and sought out mentors at different times in your life and your career? Or has it been more the case that you just met somebody that just seemed obvious you wanted to learn from?
Both. So the way the word mentorship or that whole philosophy kind of entered into my life, I'll say was by accident, meaning I wasn't out actively searching for who can mentor me here, mentor me there. I was sitting at very first time that I would classify somebody as like a mentor. Outside of that time, where I was speaking about the gumballs, right? That was just an interaction or a transactional type thing that didn't really turn into mentorship. But I was sitting in Charlotte, as a matter of fact, at the University Hilton. I went to a little seminar, Secrets of Millionaires, Billionaires, Titans, and Tycoons, right? And that was the title of it. But honestly, I'd had a successful quote unquote business at that point, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, So I went in with this complete like arms, folded, like, who's this guy? I don't even know who this guy is, right? And so I'm sitting in the back of the room so that I can leave, shortly if I wasn't getting value. But when they introduced this person, they said he was probably in his early 70s when he was getting ready to do this talk, maybe late 60s. They said, first off, he couldn't read till he was 31 years old. He's now made over $700 million. So first off, like, oh, well, you can't read and now you've made 700 million. Not that dollars mean everything, but it's just a measurable tool of, maybe you attract the success of who you become. And then they said, so he's made $100+ million in traditional like retail type business. He's made over $100 million in franchising, setting up franchises for other people. He's made over $100 million. I'm sorry, him and his team have made over $100 million in network marketing. He's made over $100 million in real estate. So you might want to listen to what this guy has to say, right? Secrets of Millionaires, Billionaires, Titans, and Tycoons. So the power of a good introduction, the power of a good like setup, right? And so I sat there and I listened to this guy and I was like, jaw dropped, like, oh my gosh, like I did have a notepad and I'm like, every single word that was coming out of his mouth, I was trying to write it down. And so after that experience, I did just go up, shake his hand, quick little bit. There's 100 people in the room or whatever. And then after that, I did reach out specifically to that person who lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was in Charlotte, and turned into be, if not the most powerful, one of the most powerful mentors in my life in ways to be lots of good things. And then also, right, if we put all of our expectation on man or person or whatever, also some things of what I don't want to do. So some of it has just kind of come by chance. Some of it has been seeking out, and I will touch on like books and audios and podcasts and so forth, because Simon Sinek, you mentioned him. I've never seen him speak live. I've never met him. I've never shook his hands. I watched his TED talk on the Start With Why, and that changed like a lot of stuff for me. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I have met Robert Kiyosaki. I did get him to sign my very first real estate transaction. Like I had my deposit from the sale that was done, which was a significant check. So he did sign that. But using some of them, like I will dig into and look and watch and read and kind of study. So I would consider them mentors without ever even really talking or having personal relationship with.
So who was the mystery man, the $100 million mentor?
Yeah. His name was Frank. Well, his name is Frank Acoin in Charleston. Oh, he was also voted South Carolina Businessman of the Year, voted by the United States Chamber of Commerce as one of the top 50 business minds in the United States. You know, and coming back to communication, John, I was going to share this earlier. It's interesting how it just came back up. So he has, if not the biggest business influence, right, on me, he's in the top 3 for sometimes it's hard to pick like number 1, number 2. He's definitely in the top 3 most influential business mindsets in my life of things that I've kind of put into place. But here was something fascinating, which goes back to maybe gestures and communication. So remember, he couldn't read till he was 31 years old. So what he's done, and I've spent a boatload of time with him, like privately, and we were working on all kinds of projects and stuff together. So I got to see it firsthand, was even though he's in his 70s now, super smart, super well-read, he still looks at the world as an 8-year-old would look at the world, because he grew up his entire, so you have to think in pictures, right? You have to communicate in pictures, because and the reason why he couldn't read was like, it wasn't dyslexia. It's like an eye motor type problem like dyslexia, but they didn't really know what it was till he was in his 30s, grew up really poor and so forth. So that communication style of, if an 8-year-old can understand it, you can impact millions and millions and millions. Like if it's so simple that an 8-year-old can understand it, all the other people can get it as well. Whereas sometimes people communicate from this high level because it's like, look at me, I want to be smart and show you all these wonderful things. And sometimes you just disconnect with people in the audience. So he wasn't much of an animated speaker, but very communicative, storytelling, picture painting. And it's been probably one of the biggest influences in my life.
So something about you that I have noticed from early on in the first like one-on-one conversation that we had, and the 4-Hour Workweek book is a great example of it. You are someone that I would describe as having an action bias, right? In other words, I hear you all the time, like when we've been on these different Zoom meetings or even face-to-face, where you will literally like pull out the 4-Hour Workweek, go to a tab that you got like a million different bookmarks in it, and read a little blurb, but you're not doing it like a preacher preaching, like, oh, listen to my words because they're so inspiring or motivating. It's almost always when I see or hear you do that, you'll mention it, and then you'll use a specific example of how you put it into action. And I'm curious, that's always, I think I've noticed that because I'm kind of the opposite. And I think part of it is how I came out of the box, but a big part of it was my accounting training. So I'm kind of curious, have you always kind of had that action bias that, hey, there's a good idea, I don't want to study it, I want to try it?
Yeah. Hey, Katie, can you grab my 3-ring binder out of the little plastic tub? So John, as you share, right? I'll give you a visual on this. And I wonder if extroversion has a piece of it, right? Because it's like kind of who we are and all that stuff. But I also wonder, because I moved around so much while I was in like elementary school and young kids, like you had to fit in if you wanted to have friends, you had to do these things. But on my kind of 3-ring binder with my goals and my affirmations and all that type of stuff, right? The back says,
shut up and demonstrate.
And so I have that on there, and I would say on a scale of 0 to 100, I maybe perform that 65% of the time, right? Or 70% of the time. Sometimes I get caught up in my Well, let's talk nature versus nurture here for a second, because Katie and I have been having some of this conversation right now because we are opposites in a lot of ways. So, and there's a lot of other things like I was sharing about living every day as if it was your last and so forth, where that has impacted and kind of changed with me over time. But the idea of ready, fire, aim versus ready, aim, fire. One of the other like triggering moments that I remember, Seth Godin in, I think the book was Lynchpin, and he's got a bunch of great material where he went through this whole thing of saying, just ship it. And so if you think about like software or products, right? Like you have software version 2.06 and then version 2.07 and then version 2.08 and version 2.10, and you get this feedback. And then the cliche thing that some people may have heard before, that when a plane takes off and is on its way to its destination, or the space shuttle takes off, 98% of the time it's constantly off track, and you have to use the gyroscope to kind of keep it on track. So the thing that I would say about taking action is it usually happens for me if it is inspired action. Then the details don't matter. Like, I mean, they matter, but they matter a whole lot less. And I won't use the exact word, but I have another note card that is it a F yes or a F no?
Yeah.
And if it's an F yes, right, then like go for it. And I share that on a scale of 0 to 100, I'm maybe a 60 to a 70% actionable, like really make it, like live that truly, because part of nurture, right? Katie is a little more reserved in that, like just launch into something and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, or something better is going to come out from it. And so also by being married in that space, like wanting to provide and have a safe environment and all of that, like the nurture side has had an impact on taking some of those actions as well. So thank you for asking that question. But this is how I would summarize it: is it's like there's a whole bunch of detail in here, but I just want to remember, like, stop talking. People pay attention to what you do more than your words and all that stuff.
This is another perfect example of you have to be aware sometimes. So again, when I'm at work and I'm doing training, I literally start some of my training by talking about showing rather than telling, right?
Sure.
And I'll use the example, Kevin Hart could come out and tell you he's funny, or he could say something funny and you will experience him being funny, right? Showing versus telling. And then I'll demonstrate something to do with communication skills to sort of make that point. But again, in my personal life, I am sometimes guilty of not the ready, aim, fire. Sometimes the ready, aim, hold on, make a plan. Hold on, let's revise the plan. Let's review the plan, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, I think there's certainly a lot of me that's naturally how I came out of box.
Yeah.
But without question, the accounting training that I had, there's a lot of training that you're literally part of your job is playing devil's advocate on behalf of the business you're working for. And hey, part of my job is to keep us out of trouble.
Yeah.
And so if I'm doing some kind of analysis of something the business might want to be doing, one of my big jobs is to find all the gotchas and figure out how do we mitigate that. And I found that being in a position where I work for myself for many years now, that's a real detrimental way to be sometimes, because, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but when you were talking earlier, it made me think of that expression about we're all selling all the time. Would you agree with that?
As a blanket statement, yeah. I mean, there's probably nuances. Yeah.
So with that, I'm kind of curious, and I'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes because I want to respect your time, and we're right about an hour. But I'm kind of curious. I have my perception of you in all of our interactions is that you're a very good salesperson. So I'm curious, how much of your sales ability would you attribute to things that you have formally studied, whether it's books, seminars, mentors, whatever it is, versus things that you just did them, they worked, and so you kept doing them because you just, through experience, knew that they worked?
Yeah, I would say on a spectrum of all tactic versus all like, I don't know, intuition. I don't know if that's on the opposite side of tactic, right? I would say I lean way, 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 way more towards the just be in flow. And so from again, going back to, we have to define all the terms, right? So in sales, many people who are listening may have their own perspective of what sales are. And that's where, when I say, like, for small business or solopreneur, the things that we do are birthed out of us. Not many people stay in small business and hate what it is that they do, right? They might for a while, but over time, it's like, I can't do this anymore, blah, blah, blah. So the things that I have sold or continuously sell, it is just things that I am like, I'm all in on. So it's not a sale. And then there's the cliche things. Well, are you an educator or are you a seller or whatever? And like, no, like, I just think the 4-Hour Work Week is the greatest, if not one of the greatest books that has ever been written in the history of the world, because of the impact that it had for me. That same mentor, here's an interesting thing, Frank Acoin in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I found the book. Now listen to this. This is interesting. He had this entire wall, like a library. They turned a one-car garage into like a home office, and it's the entire side of the wall was just all these books. And one day I was down there and just looking at them. And that's where I saw on the spine, the 4-Hour Work Week, and then the subtitle, Escape the 9-to-5, Live Anywhere, and Join the New Rich. So I pulled that off, and I was like, this is where I first got introduced to this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds fantastic. And my number one mentor in the world goes, the book is horrible. And he was serious. And I was like, I hadn't read it, didn't know anything about it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, that guy will never be wealthy, right? And if you read the book, he doesn't talk about being wealthy. He talks about having
in the traditional sense.
Yeah, having freedom and like the money multiplier and time value versus money. So I didn't read the book for, I don't know, a year after that, because this massive influence in my life was like, oh, it's horrible. That guy's never going to be wealthy. And then whatever the trigger was, I don't remember, where I was like, nah, like, escape the 9-to-5. I was probably sitting in traffic one day, escape the 9-to-5, live anywhere, and join the new rich. I got it. And I got the audio book, and I listened to just the first like section, and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is gold.
Yeah.
And so I don't make any money. Like I'm not like, I just, if I love it, if it's had an impact on me, I want to share, because maybe it'll have the impact on somebody else. So it's more of a service as it is than a sale. And that's where I think if people can really, especially in today's gig economy, right? If you can find things that you're truly like excited, passionate, and want to do or want to share, like, there's ways to make money kind of doing anything. And Gary Vaynerchuk, another favorite, he's like, you can make $50,000 a year being miserable, or you can make $50,000 a year doing something that you love. Like, which would you rather choose? It doesn't have to be millions and millions and billions and scalable and international empires and stuff that a lot of these personal development business books and stuff talk about. It's like, if you can make the same amount of money doing something you love, wouldn't that be better? Even if you're working harder, it doesn't feel like you're working harder and more hours.
Yeah. And you just reminded me of something that I think it came up when I was, we were at like a family function around like Thanksgiving, Christmas, somewhere around the end of the year last year. And some of my girlfriend's nieces and nephews who were home from college were just kind of sharing stories about, they were like freshmen or sophomore. And, it's kind of exciting to them still, because, the whole college experience is kind of new to them. And I heard different family members give them unsolicited advice. And I remember thinking to myself, about the only useful piece of advice that I think I could give any young person, mainly because things have changed so much since I was, college age, about the only thing that I would feel comfortable and confident giving advice on to anyone is what you just said, is find something that you like, figure out how to make money doing that, and then stick with that. And for me, the driving reason behind that is I spent 20 plus years in a career that I hated, that I barely was. I mean, if you look at it on a resume, I worked for big companies and I had job titles that were good jobs and made good money. But to me, in my mind, for the level of success that I felt like I could have and should have had with the amount of time I spent there, I look at it and think, what a giant waste of time, that I wish the one positive attribute that I had that I let kind of waste some of my time was persistence. I believed in my brain that even though I hated the job and I hated the industry that I was in, that if I switched, I was a quitter. I associated those things in my brain. And it wasn't until somewhere along the line I let go of that belief that I realized, crap, if I would have just thought about what I wanted to do and pursued that from the beginning, where would I have been today with all of those years then under my belt of not just 10,000 hours of being like an expert in something, but 20 or 30 or who knows how many tens of thousands of hours that unfortunately I missed out on.
Yeah.
But then, you got to think about that. When's the best time to take action? Well, the best time was probably yesterday or 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that when people that ask me for advice, I almost always come back to some version of that exact same thing, which is figure out something that really excites you and then figure out how to make money doing it.
Yeah.
Because somebody told me this years and years ago, and I think it was in the context actually of doing research in my old job. No matter what the thing is, pick anything that you're interested in. There's experts on it. There's PhDs on it. There's college courses for it. There's degrees related to it. There's entire industry trade groups associated with it. And that was something that in my old career, I used to have to research companies and industries when I worked in mergers and acquisitions, because I would have to, within maybe a week, become sort of a junior expert on an entire industry. And that was my shortcut, is find all the experts on it, find all the things that they've written, all the things that they've put out, all the documents for the top companies in that industry, and just immerse myself in those. It was like the quickest way to get as expert as you could in a short period of time. And now I use that same approach when I'm looking at creating a new course, right? So I'll say, I might even literally Google top 3 experts in fill in the blank, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the starting point for how I start researching that thing.
Yeah, it's good.
So with that in mind, we're at around the hour mark here. So I want to go ahead and wrap up. Of all of the things that you have done over the years, I know you're big into self-development. What is maybe 1 or 2 things? I always hate to narrow it down to one thing, because then people feel like the pressure, like it has to be the best thing. But if you just had 1 or 2 or a few, I don't need to narrow the number down, things that you could offer as some of the things that made the biggest difference in terms of actionable things in your business life. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a book, a person, a mentor, an experience. What are some of the most impactful things that you have found in your life that you could pass along as maybe a hack or a shortcut for someone else?
Yeah. So I'll tell a very powerful, for me, it's an incredibly powerful story that changed everything for me 10, 11, 12 years ago. So, okay. And also, we were chatting about this right before we got on the, right before we started recording. So we all know that life is fragile. There is no telling when the end may come, right? As cliche as those things are. But here's where something happened for me. And there's a lot of backstory to it. But I was watching a movie, a movie called In Time. And I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, but it's Justin Timberlake is the main actor. So I'd say it's a B+ rated movie. Wasn't ever super famous. But here's the premise of the movie. It's kind of futuristic, and people are born as infants the way they normally are. They age until they're 25. And when they turn 25, they are genetically modified to no longer age. So you're 25 for the rest of your life. However, everybody has a built-in life clock into their arm. And when you turn 25, you have 1 year of life left, and you watch it tick down second by second by second. So there's no dollars in the world. The currency, instead of being dollars, the currency is time. So instead of going to work for $50,000 a year, you might make 5 months a year. Instead of buying a coffee at Starbucks for $4, it might cost you 4 minutes. So you're constantly adding and subtracting time, but it is always ticking down. And if and when it gets to 0, literally you're watching it and you keel over and die right there.
Oh, interesting.
So here's the fascinating takeaway from it. There's different what's called time zones that people live in. And the rich, instead of having millions of dollars, they live for millions of years at 25 years old. No aging, no cancer, no health issues, no nothing, but they live for millions of years. The poor, instead of living check to check, they literally live day to day. You might wake up in the morning and only have 6 hours left on your clock. And if you don't hustle and get more time added, like it's over.
You're just done.
You're just done right there. And so I'm watching that, and I was on a plane flying from Africa back to the United States. I was in a bunch of credit card debt. I was kind of like looking for new things in life, watching this movie. And I remember thinking, because there's a scene, right? If I only had 6 hours left to live, I've still got 9 hours on this flight. Like, what would I do with my last 6 hours? I can't call my family. I can't call my friends. I can't like go do this experience. So I was like, all right, so if I only had 6 hours left to live, what would I do? Like literally 6 hours. And I couldn't add more time in this hypothetical, right? Who would I say I love you to? Who would I say I'm sorry to? What would be the guilts that I've been carrying around or caused with other people that I would try to clear up and so forth? And then the interesting thing happened was, all right, so how do my decisions change if I have 6 days instead of 6 hours, if I've got 6 days? Right. Oh, and one of the things when I had the 6 hours, I was like, well, I wouldn't go book as many weddings as I could. I wouldn't go provide this business service that I was doing because I liked it. But if I only had 6 hours or 6 days, it wouldn't matter. I would go do these things. And then it turned into, okay, how do my decisions change if I have 6 weeks? How do my decisions change if I have 6 years? What if I have 6 decades? Because who knows? The only thing that separates us between life and death in many cases is a thin yellow line in the middle of the road with somebody sending a text on the other side or you sending a text, right? Mm-hmm. So this idea of how does one live totally present in the moment as if this was our last moment while still planning for a long, fruitful future. And it's this like duality, right? Yeah. But do the little things matter if you only had 6 hours? They matter if you got 6 decades, right? Like we let these things come in. And so I was sharing with you after this, like 2023, we've had 4 family members / really close people pass away. 3 of the 4 completely unexpectedly. And so watching these, going to these services, listening to the people, did they live their life fully? Did they not live their life fully? Regret is one of like the worst, I think, possible things somebody can experience. And so that has a lot more depth to it, but I would just say, and I'm speaking to myself, like looking in the camera, right? Not speaking to anybody else. Maybe it has an impact, but how do you live today as if it was your last? How do you love today as if it was your last? How do you forgive today as if it was your last? Speaking to myself, right? While also planning for, well, what if I'm here for a long time in the future? How do I continuously do that? And that living, as cliche as it is, as present in the moment, the power of now, man, the things that it opens up, like the opportunities that present itself, the looking at life in a different way instead of in this rut or this pattern or this same circle, that would be the number one thing I would tell myself if I was younger. I would tell myself now, I believe I'll continue to tell myself, and I would try to share with other people, like do it.
Yeah, so you're reminding me of Jocko Willink talks about the dichotomy of leadership. I think it's actually a book title, one of his books. And when he explains the whole dichotomy of leadership, it made me think about how so many other things in life, it's not either or, right? Like, do you live today like it's your last day, or do you live today planning for a year from now, 5 years from now, like you were talking about? Yes. Right. In a way, the answer is yes. Almost so many things in our life are actually naturally by design, whatever you believe in spiritually or whatever, but they're almost by default dichotomies.
Yeah.
Right. If we don't, at least to some extent, live today like it's our last, well, then every day is just kind of blasé and we don't really get a lot of juice out of life. But on the flip side, if we're just constantly planning for the future, then how are we enjoying the now? And I think the simple answer is everything's a dichotomy.
Yeah.
And we're constantly having to figure out what's that balance and how do we figure that thing out? And I think one of those sort of human built-in nature versus nurture more on the nature side of things is we all want a silver bullet all the time. We're always looking for some answer, some hack, some one cure that if we just do that thing or we believe in that thing, it just automatically takes care of everything else. And the reality is there is no one thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and what on that, just to one more sentence, one of the biggest lessons I've gotten from Katie, one of the greatest reminders is instead of either or, live both and. So how do I both and? Yeah. Both and versus either or.
Yeah. That's something somebody talked to me about, the yes and as I think it's like an exercise that they do in improvisational classes.
Yeah.
Where they literally have to use the yes and mindset, where somebody will pose a question to them or give them a word, and they have to answer it in terms of yes and then they have to kind of riff on that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like a way of teaching people how to get out of a mindset of a but or an or and think in more of like an and type of a mindset.
Yeah, totally.
So actually, I think that's a great way to wrap up is when we started this talking about mindset, we're kind of ending talking about mindset. One of the books that I can't remember if I talked to you about this before, this 6-minute X-ray. Have I talked to you about that before?
I don't remember. No.
I'll send you a link to this one. I bring it up because the book is all about rapid behavior profiling, right? And he talks in that book about all these specific tactics that you can use to basically profile another person so that you can get to know them very quickly so you can communicate more effectively with them. And he was using an example in one of the interviews where he said there was some guy who called him, they wanted to hire him as a coach. He's like, look, I need to come across more confident. I want to get into being a public speaker and I need to learn all these body language things about how do I use my body and appear more confident. And he said, well, let me give you the best hack that there is. Get your shit together.
Yeah.
Right. He said, I could teach you all the body language that I look for when I'm trying to decide if this person is confident. But at the end of the day, if you just have your ducks in a row and you just generally in life have your stuff together, you will be more confident naturally.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to get him to change his mindset from what are the hacks or the things that I should broadcast to make people think that I'm confident. Stop thinking like that. Do the things that you're supposed to do, and that stuff will just come out of you naturally.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is that's much harder than learning a tactic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So tell the audience what is the best way to get in touch with you, whether it's your website or wherever it is in social media. And if they were to get in touch with you, what is it that you want people to get in touch with you about in your business?
Sure. So pretty much on all social media platforms, it's at The Catlows, CATLOWS. Our website is thecatlows.com. Our email is hello@thecatlows.com. So YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the above is at The Catlows. So right now from a business standpoint, the number one thing, or the number one, but it's in the same space with two variables to it, is we help people take amazing vacations, right? Save time, money, and hassle in booking like a leisure type vacation experience. And then number two, those who are travel enthusiasts who want to start a part-time side gig, part-time business, earn money in the travel industry, make money on your own vacations. Like we kind of help coach them and guide them that way, as we've been doing that for 10 plus years. But I think we are getting ready to launch. It's still going to be under the Catlows, but the Catlow Show, which is, again, as I was saying earlier, kind of the starting tagline is two opposites, right? Me and Katie, very opposites, navigating life, love, and other impactful topics. So some of it is our sharing. We got lots of interviews we're going to be doing and so forth. So we're excited about that, but it hasn't launched yet.
Awesome. All right. So everybody go look up thecatlows.com and find them on all those social media platforms. Michael, I know you and Katie are both super busy with all the different things you have going on. So I appreciate you taking this time to spend with me, to chat about some of these different things and to share some of these things. Hopefully, all of you that are listening or watching have gotten a lot out of it. I've got a bunch of notes that I've taken, and we'll include some of that stuff in the show notes. So thank you for your time, and everybody go check out thecatlows.com.